We have Councillor Allison. I'll just check if we've got Councillor Anderson. We don't seem to have Councillor Anderson. We have Councillor Barker, Councillor Chalmers, Councillor Clark. I'll check if we've got Councillor Cooper. We don't seem to have Councillor Cooper. I'll check if we've got Councillor Dewar. Yes, we have Councillor Dewar. We have Councillor Equi. I'll check if we've got Councillor Fagan. No, we don't have Councillor Fagan. We have Councillor Gowland, Councillor Hamilton, Councillor Keat, Councillor Lambie. I'll check whether we've got Councillor Lockhart. We don't seem to have Councillor Lockhart. We have Councillor Loudon, Councillor Marsh. I understand Councillor MacDonald is having some technical difficulties, but I see she's now in the meeting. We have Councillor McDougall, Councillor Nugent, Councillor Ray, Councillor Razak, Councillor Robb, Councillor Ross, Councillor Scott, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Toner. I have apologies from Councillor Walker, and we have Councillor Williams. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Susan. So the first item is any declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations? No declarations of interest, so we'll move on to item 2, the minutes of the previous meeting. That's pages 5 to 10. Can I move that as a correct record?
Yeah, that's fine.
Anybody have any comments on that? No comments. Okay. On to item 3 of the agenda. So this is the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy Action Plan 2025-2026, and that's on pages 11 to 52. Can I invite Gemma Dodds to speak to this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to agree the action plan for the 2025-26 year of the Council's Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy. As outlined in section 3 of the report, the 2025-26 action plan is the third annual action plan under the Council's 2022 to 2027 Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy. The strategy was approved by the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee on the 15th of June 2022, and the associated 5-year action plan was approved by the same committee on the 8th of February in 2023. Delivery of actions within the strategy provides the focus for our sustainable development activity and also enables the Council to fulfil its legislative duties. The action plan for 25-26 is included within Appendix 1 of the committee report. This was produced following extensive consultation with all Council resources and key services throughout the Council. The action plan is split across 13 priorities that were agreed as part of the development of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy, which align with the Council plan. The action plan includes 2 sections: performance contextual measures towards the strategy's outcomes and improvement actions for each of the themes within the strategy. The action plan outlines the steps required for each action, the responsible Council service and the expected outcomes. Each action is categorised to indicate if it contributes to adaptation, mitigation or sustainable development. Appendix 2 details the improvement actions identified during completion of the Leadership Climate Emergency Checklist with the Steering Group and Officers Group during 2024. It also highlights how the 25-26 Action Plan addresses the priorities identified. As outlined in Section 5 of the report, the Action Plan progress will be reported to the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee at Q2 and Q4. I refer you back to Section 2 of the paper and ask that the Council's 2025-26 Action Plan for the implementation of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy is agreed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have any questions or comments on that? Councillor Ross Clark, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that report. On page 17, in reference to the target to increase the mode share of school children travelling by ACTA travel or public transport by 1%, with the decision to remove school transport from some with the distance change, resulting in more school children having effectively no other choice but to use active travel or public transport. Is this target not now too easily achievable? Does it need to be reviewed in light of that decision?
David Tinchelwood, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, you're right. Obviously, with the change in transport criteria, we are obviously looking at the school travel plans within all our secondary schools at the moment, working with our colleagues in Roads and Transport. It's an established process, more successful in primary, but we're moving towards putting them in place in secondary school to look at different ways where we can encourage active travel, park and stride, increase cycling, for example, as well as other strategies in place to try and help our families get their children to and from school with the change in that criteria at the moment. So there will be, I'd imagine, an increase, but we will be serving parents as part of that as well. So we'll get more sort of quantitative data going forward about what that will look like in the coming months. Thank you.
Is that answering your question? Next, can I call Councillor Katie Loudon, please?
Right, thank you, Chair. Is that me now?
Yeah, no, we've got you now, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. My question's following on from Councillor Clark's, and thanks to David there for a bit of an explanation of what's going on and the work that is happening, depending on what comes out of the decision on school transport. I just wondered, David, if you could tell us if we've got any sort of working figure that the resource is able to use for how many children and young people eligible for school transport are going to be affected by the changes in policy that's informing your work just now.
David?
Thank you. We're looking at possibly at this point in time a 31% reduction on children who qualify for school transport in the secondary sector. We have still 4 schools to write out to parents to let them know whether they qualify or not over the next couple of weeks. And again, that's working with our colleagues in Roads and Transport, assessing the safe walking routes and if there are any changes to the numbers. So we will probably have a more complete number probably after the sort of Easter break at this point in time, once we've let all families know and we've completed that exercise. But at the moment, it's looking like a 31% reduction on children who currently qualify. Obviously, there's new primary 7s coming on, again, who will apply this year for the first time. So again, that number won't be exact until we know who's all applying. And obviously, we've got S5 and S6 leavers as well. So there'll be changes round about the edges, but we're quite confident in and around that sort of 31% reduction at this point in time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Thank you.
Next, Councillor Kirsten Robb.
Thanks to the team. I think it's more more comprehensive and across more services than has ever been before. It's really useful to see the difference highlighted between mitigation and adaptation. I think that's an important one, and that we all continue to speed up action to reduce emissions, but it's now inevitable that we will see more of the storm events that we saw in January. So that's why I was pleased to see on page 22 more about the climate risk register. Obviously, these events are now inevitable. We've locked in all these emissions through an action on climate change before, but they don't have to be catastrophic. So this is about how we plan, invest and adapt our buildings, our transport systems and future policies that we're making to make sure we don't lock in more emissions and we adapt at the same time. So just an appeal to other councillors as well. You'll see how the impact of the storms have been felt across all your resources, from community and enterprise, through trees and roads to housing with roofs flying off and so on, just to appeal to you to highlight these things in your committees and to ask for a response. So the question to the staff is really, how will we gather that learning from some of these extreme weather events in the climate risk register and involve the whole council in that?
Adam Wallace, please.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Rob. So this year we are working with colleagues in the Council's risk team to develop a risk register specifically looking at climate change. Through the risk team we're assessing what's already been done around risk. We've got adverse weather risks, we've got climate change risks, and we're seeing how we can better focus them to look at how we're responding to the impacts of climate change. So we're working with the risk team to kind of coordinate action right across the council, and making sure that we engage with the right teams, from roads to housing to whoever else it is, and bringing them into that conversation as well. That'll be fed back through the council's steering group, which sits at a head of service level, to make sure that we're capturing everything that is happening. If we're missing anything, that's where it'll be brought in as well. So could you remind me the second part of your question there? Is that okay? Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, can I call now Councillor Ralph Barker, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that report, Gemma. Perhaps not questions, but if I could make the comment, really with reference to the third definition of sustainable development. In this period, well, this council period in Clydesdale East Ward, we have had, under planning, 2 footpaths closed with local objections which were overruled. Now, I do have to say they may not have been registered rights of way, because we never really had a comprehensive network of rights of way in Scotland because we didn't need it. So it's a pity that in terms of sustainable development, we do lose 2 used footpaths. The other item is that while we are trying to reduce car use, but that's not really the point. We've had several bus stops and bus services discontinued, something I'm taking up with SPT, or trying to take up with SPT. But so in those terms, we seem to be going in the wrong direction. May I just say, and I did compliment in a previous committee, although the storm, forget its proper name, Elwyn, is not the worst that I can remember in my time. There were far, far worse storms in the past. But the council did go out of its way to clear a lot of trees off roads. And a lot of these trees were not council trees, they were other landowners' trees. So it was a lot of work done at quite a lot of cost. So thank everybody for that. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. David Booth.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Barker. In terms of the issues around about rights of way and the kind of planning issues, I'm happy to take them out with there and have a conversation along with the head of planning around, because that's more a matter for planning. In terms of the bus stops, I'm going to pass over to Colin Park, if that's okay, in terms of answering that. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Councillor Parker, for your question. I'm presuming we're talking about in the bus services and stops in and around Thankerton area, as well as some other wider ones. But again, I can pick them up in a wee bit more detail. And there's significant pressure across the bus industry, and I'm certainly not here to defend or support commercial services. But we do obviously try and work with SPT to provide the subsidy that's required. That pressure's across the entire west of Scotland, but we may have some impacts in services in some parts of the council, but we do try and offset that with improvements elsewhere. Classic example is what we're doing in East Kilbride just now with Hare Myers, where we're building a significant major bus and rail interchange there as well. And down in the kind of the Clydesdale area as well, we do try and progress that with plans in place for this coming year to look at Lanark bus and rail interchange as well. So unfortunately there's always going to be pressure on the bus industry, but we do try and work through it and work with yourself. But I can pick up in a wee bit more detail with you later if that helps. Thanks.
Could you just come back? Yes, it's not an issue I've raised with the road, so I really didn't expect Colin to be able to answer something that I've not put in front of him. There have been enough other roads issues. It does seem to be an SPT issue, apart from the concerns about reduction in funding and increased costs of running buses. I will let Colin know what the issues are, but I do intend to take it up with SPT. Just it's strange that we cut out bus stops at a time when we're trying to improve the use of public transport. So thanks, but I wouldn't have expected Colin to be able to answer any details on that. So thanks, Colin.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Finally, we have Councillor John Ross, please.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. My question relates to an item on page 20, and it's to do with retaining the green flag accreditation. I see here we have a number of parts mentioned. Can you possibly update me on the situation with Châtellerault, whether we have green flag accreditation there, and if not, what are we doing about actually achieving green flag accreditation? Thanks.
Kevin Carr, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Ross, for the question. Simply, we don't have green flag status for Châtellerault. We have status for the 3 parts that are in the report. We're also in discussions in some other parts with community groups who are willing to support the council and going towards green flag accreditation. We're very much dependent on the community groups because they do a lot of the heavy lifting for the accreditation in terms of that community involvement. And a lot of the work that's required to make the accreditation. If there are groups, operating out of Châtellerault that are, happy to step up and work with us and our grounds teams in achieving that accreditation, we're happy to do so.
Fine. Would it be possible to give me a list of what's actually required there, and we'll see if we can set things in motion to
absolutely.
see if we can do that.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think we've got any other people wishing to speak. So can I return to the recommendation on page 11? And can we agree the Council Action Plan for 2025-26 for the implementation of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy?
Agreed.
Okay, that looks as if that's all agreed, so thanks very much for that. So we'll move on now to item 4, which is South Lanarkshire Council Net Zero Route Map, Scope 1 organisational emissions, and that is on pages 53 to 62. And can I invite Catherine McCafferty to speak to this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update the committee on the new climate change legislation and forthcoming changes to national carbon reduction targets, on the South Lanarkshire Council position in reducing organisational carbon emissions, and a proposal to develop a South Lanarkshire Council net zero route map for Scope 1 organisational emissions. Section 3 of the report provides the legislative background and the Council's duties under this legislation. In November 2024, the Scottish Parliament passed the Climate Change Emissions Reductions Targets Scotland Act 2024, which modifies the greenhouse gas emissions reductions targets set within previous legislation. While the target of net zero emissions by 2045 has not been changed, the Scottish Government is seeking to establish 5-yearly carbon budget targets, which will be set through secondary legislation later in 2025. Public bodies are expected to contribute to the national targets with the statutory framework for their climate action and reporting outlined in the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009. New draft statutory guidance for public bodies has been published recently for consultation, and the Council will respond to them in May this year. Section 3.4 highlights the many carbon reduction projects and initiatives implemented over recent years, resulting in a 68.9 carbon emissions reductions since the baseline year of 2005. Scope 1 emissions account for a sizeable proportion of the Council's current overall carbon footprint, around 62%. Consequently, the Council has agreed to aim towards zero Scope 1 emissions by 2038. This 2038 target is in line with ambitious public sector targets detailed in Scotland's Climate Change Plan and Scotland's Heat and Buildings Strategy. There is a target there for local authorities to achieve zero emissions heat from their public sector buildings by 2038. But since the time of writing, the Scottish Government have confirmed that the Heat and Buildings Bill will not be taken forward in its current form. This could include a change to the 2038 target, and we await further guidance on this target from the Scottish Government. We also have the National Transport Strategy. There is a requirement to phase out the need for new petrol or diesel vehicles in the public sector fleet by 2030. So Section 4 of the report provides an assessment of South Lanarkshire Council services in reducing their Scope 1 carbon emissions and their future plans. Section 4.1 provides the relevant legislation for public sector buildings and an update on the latest Scope 1 figures. Overall emissions have reduced by 51.7% since the 2005 baseline. However, Scope 1 emissions have only reduced by 26%. Section 4.18 outlines the changes to delivery, including the challenges to delivery, including around 300 buildings have fossil fuel heating. There's ageing infrastructure in a state, and obviously the budget constraints. Previous figures calculated around 900 million to decarbonise the council estate. Section 4.2 follows a similar format for fleet services. The emissions from fleet have reduced by 33% since 2005. And Section 4.25 outlines the planned next steps for reducing emissions, while Sections 4.29 outlines the challenges to delivery, including the financial cost, the availability of charging infrastructure, and the availability of low-carbon alternatives for heavier goods vehicles. Section 4.3 highlights the current rate of carbon emissions reduction for Scope 1 emissions and notes that this will remain high without significant action. It's therefore proposed that as part of the Council's longer-term strategic planning that the net zero route map for Scope 1 emissions be developed. A Scope 1 route map will coordinate action, set clear and achievable emissions targets and align spend to achieve these targets. The route map would be developed alongside other statutory services and highlight the significant financial investment required to achieve net zero. In the first instance, it is proposed that a 3 to 5 year route map be developed. All the standard implications are noted in sections 5 to 9, including the significant financial implications to achieving national net zero targets, and that the proposed net zero route map would help the Council achieve its legal duties with regards to climate change, sustainability and the environment. So if I can return to the recommendations of the report, which is to note the publication of the Climate Change Emissions Reductions Target Scotland Act 2004, to note the Council's position to date in reducing organisational carbon emissions, and to agree the development of a South Lanarkshire Council net zero route map for its Scope 1 organisational emissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments on that report? Councillor Robb, please.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine, for the report. It's really good to see us working towards pinning down some actions, whatever we can do with the resources available. Climate change isn't going away, it's here and now, and we need to keep working on this, and we can't keep kicking energy into the long grass at a national level. But whatever your thoughts on climate change, there's so many co-benefits to taking action on this. So the question would be, what's your kind of timescale for the delivery of the route map for the Scope 1 emissions, and thinking about beyond to Scope 2 and 3 emissions as well? But you don't have to answer the second part if you're not sure of that yet. But the timescale for Scope 1 would be good. Thanks.
Catherine McCafferty, please.
Thank you, Chair. We are looking at developing this alongside services. We're also taking the advice from the Scottish Government consultation that's out at the moment, which actually sets a sort of timeline for this. And local authorities having a climate change plan, and the sort of timeline is for that is 2027. So we're working to that sort of timescale, but we will be developing it in the meantime with services to get some sort of targets in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I now ask Councillor Ralph Barker?
Aye, thanks, Chair. Thanks for that report. We're obviously making perhaps better progress than I thought we could have done. There was a point, and I can't get back to the actual point, must be about page 58, and that is the aim of replacing all light vehicles, cars and vans, away from petrol and diesel. And I think it said by 2025, there's a clear cost to that, which, I mean, that is stated how much extra it's going to cost at a difficult time for funding. But at the same time, I would be concerned that we should keep a good element of the fleet on diesel and petrol for eventualities and things going wrong. The day will come when we've no electricity, but we still have petrol and diesel. So just to express that concern that we could go too far, too quick on that particular point of replacing petrol and diesel vehicles at a time when the real advantage to climate change of doing that, I mean, it's not totally clear. While most of our electricity is still provided by fossil fuels. But it's just a comment. As long as we are confident we can do that without risking a problem at some time in the future that we've concentrated too much on electric vehicles. Thanks.
Could I ask Colin Park to respond to that, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Barker, for that question again. I acknowledge what you're saying and give you a degree of comfort that we're not going to replace all our vehicles overnight. It could be argued that we've not progressed as quickly as we would like to meet the target. In fact, we have not progressed as quickly as we would like to meet the targets. Some of the barriers to transition over to low carbon are to do with availability of charging points, the cost of the vehicles as well. The cost of the vehicles have come down. Still more expensive than a traditional diesel. However, the whole life costs of the vehicles are cheaper. Less maintenance required. But just by the very nature of where we are, we've got a significant percentage of the light vehicles to replace, and that will be done over a phased basis. So for the foreseeable, we will still have an element of diesels in our fleet. However, we are moving to replace them all. We are looking to take advantage of some of the kind of capacity that's emerging at some of our park and rides are less busy than what they were pre-COVID. So some of these hubs that are out there for the public to use, we're looking for the council fleet to kind of tap into it as well. So that the availability of charging infrastructure is going to improve. In the west of Scotland as well, we're working with the city region to try and enhance and expand our EV infrastructure for the public and business to use as well. So we're heading in the right direction. But in terms of your particular point, we're not going to see an overnight replacement of all our vehicles to EVs, but we will be going there over the timeline that's been set by national government for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Kirsten Robb.
Thank you. It's maybe worth a gentle reminder that Scotland has produced over 100% of its energy by renewable sources in recent years, and that we're continuing to work on decarbonisation of the grid. I think most of the Council's emissions reductions have come from decarbonisation of the grid. So, and as far as I know, the sun and wind aren't going anywhere, so we will continue to produce renewable energy. Whilst why we're trying to get away from fossil fuels is because one of the reasons, apart from climate change, is that these are volatile global markets, and we've seen the impact of that on our energy bills through wars and other matters as well. So I think for energy security, going down the renewables route is a good one, and Scotland has a natural advantage there. So just a few points of clarification there.
Okay, thank you. There's nobody else looking to speak, so Can I ask you to note, can we note the recommendations 1 and 2 and agree to the development of a South Lanarkshire Council net zero route map for Scope 1 organisational emissions? Is that agreed? Yes. Excellent. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item number 5, composting of household garden waste. And that's on pages 63 to 66. And I'll invite Kevin Carr to speak to this report, please.
Thanks, Chair. Morning all. At Council's Executive Committee approved the introduction of a charge for uplift of garden waste bins on the 18th of June 2024. At the time of approval, Waste Services were asked to investigate the feasibility of introducing an initiative where home composting bins were made available to residents as an alternative to purchasing a garden waste permit, which is the basis of this report. A review of home composting bin provision by local authorities in Scotland has been undertaken and highlights that 27 offer advice on home composting only. The 4 remaining local authorities offer either a free composter or a discounted composter from an approved supplier. Feedback from those councils suggests that uptake is generally low, from no uptake some years to a few hundred. Officers have also explored external funding opportunities. Unfortunately, there are no available funds for this type of activity. Given the uncertainty and demand in South Lanarkshire, it is proposed to undertake a pilot exercise with the purchase of 100 home composters that will be offered free on a first-come, first-served basis. As anticipated, the pilot will cost in the region of £5,000, which the service will fund from existing revenue budget. Following conclusion of the pilot, and if there is demand for this type of bin, officers will bring forward a further paper for members to consider options for home composting. So hopefully straightforward, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. Have we got any questions or comments? Councillor Bert Thompson, please.
Chair, just a brief comment to say that I welcome this. I think it's a great initiative, and I'll certainly hope to participate. So good on you, good and well done for the source resource here. I welcome it.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Councillor Kirsten Robb, please.
Okay, you can take Ross first if you want, but that's fine. Okay, so yep, just to say thanks very much to the team for looking into this. I think it really chimes with the waste hierarchy that we're supposed to be reducing first, and then reusing, recycling, and landfill is the last resort. So just encourage people to take advantage of the scheme, and there's good advice on the council's website on how to compost properly to make sure you get the best results, so you'd be saving money and getting a nice product for your garden. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, could I call Councillor Ross Clark, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that report. How do we plan to promote this pilot? How will people request one of these home composters? Because as we see in the papers, it's not been a big take-up in other areas. So there's obviously some work to be done to try and make sure that our own pilot is successful, however we judge that success to look like. So my question relates around the promotion. How do we intend to promote this?
Kevin Carr, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Clark. So we'll do what we normally do. So we'll go through all our social media channels. We'll do a view article as well. I think for ease of residents' use, we'll create an online form where they can apply. There'll also be an option to call the call centre, but obviously we'll try and ensure that residents use the online form. But as I said, following approval, if it's approved today, we'll speak to our comms colleagues. We'll need to go through the procurement exercise first, obviously, for the composters themselves, and then we'll undertake a comms exercise to make sure as many residents are aware of it as possible.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Julia Mars, please.
Thank you, Chair. I very much welcome this composter policy as a way to support garden recycling and obviously ease the impact of the Burgundy bin charge. Although I do have some concerns about the very small numbers currently available. Can you advise whether these composters are the same composters proposed by the previous administration in 2021, but very quickly defunded by the current administration in 2022. And furthermore, whether the composters noted previously from 2021 are still in storage and can be added to these 100 pilot composters, please.
Kevin Carr, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Mars. So these composters will likely be different. The previous composters that were part of the investment fund, as I think as it was at the time, were hot composters, and it was anticipated that they would be used for food as well. So the composters that we're looking to do now will be for garden waste only, so they will be different. In terms of the second part of your question, in terms of the funding that was redirected, I think, to the cost of living crisis fund at the time, we'd already purchased a very small number of those hot composters. We'd given them out over recent years, and I think following discussion at this committee over last year, an offer was made to schools if they wanted to take the last remaining, and I know over recent months we've been giving those out to schools.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. So can we now return to the recommendation on page 63? And can we agree to the introduction of a pilot home composter scheme to determine demand for such a service? Are we all agreed? Okay, thank you. Moving now to item 6, South Lanarkshire Climate Change Adaptation Progress Update, and that's on pages 67 to 72. Can I invite Adam Wallace to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on the most recent national guidance on adaptation, provide an update on the progress of South Lanarkshire Council in meeting its duty to deliver Scotland's statutory climate change adaptation programme, and to outline the intended future actions of the Council relating to adaptation. Section 3 provides some background information to the report. The Council has a legislative duty to deliver climate change adaptation in line with the objectives of the Scottish National Adaptation Plan, and the Climate Change Scotland Act states that a public body must act in a way best calculated to help deliver Scotland's climate change adaptation programme. Section 3.2 provides detail on the definition of climate change adaptation and some examples. Adaptation differs from climate change mitigation, which primarily aims to reduce or prevent emission of greenhouse gases, whereas adaptation aims to respond to the impacts of climate change that are already happening. Section 4 provides detail on the Scottish National Adaptation Plan 3, which was published in September 2024 and sets out the actions that the Scottish Government and partners will take to respond to the impacts of climate change between 2024 and 2029. Over the next 5 years, SNAP 3, which is the shorthand for the National Adaptation Plan, commits the Scottish Government and its partners, including local authorities, to delivering over 200 policies and actions across the 5 outcomes noted at 4.3. Actions within the plan include improved flood warnings, encouraging behaviour change to cope with water stress, strengthening Scotland's Climate Action Hub network, strengthening the skills and capacity of businesses, communities and organisations to adapt, protecting Scotland's cultural and historic heritage, and ensuring that all parts of Scotland are building climate resilience through regional partnerships. South Lanarkshire Council is part of one such regional partnership called Climate Ready Clyde, which covers the Glasgow City region. Through Climate Ready Clyde, the Council supports delivery against SNAP 3, most notably through our continued support for Climate Ready Clyde's Glasgow City region adaptation strategy and action plan, which aligns with the national plan. The Council's Executive Committee endorsed both Climate Ready Clyde documents in June 2021, and the objectives of those documents are mirrored within the Council's own Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy and Annual Action Plan. Section 5 goes on to detail some of the progress made to date. The Council has made significant progress in delivering adaptation action, and this has been recorded and reported through the Council's own Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy progress reports and in the annual Public Bodies Climate Change Duties report. Action so far has included progressing the realisation of the Clyde Climate Forest, ongoing peatland conservation at Langlands Moss, implementation of the Managing Flood Risk 2 procedure, ensuring resilient building design across the Council's estate, exploration of smart energy systems, and the remediation of significant areas of previously unused or derelict land. In December 2024, the Sustainability team delivered a climate change adaptation workshop with Climate Ready Clyde to council officers from across all 5 resources. The purpose of the session was to increase knowledge and awareness of climate change adaptation, identify service areas potentially most at risk from climate change impacts, and understand the level of activity currently being undertaken to adapt to these impacts. The session highlighted the main potential climate change impacts on service provision as anticipated by council officers. These are noted at section 5.3. These impacts will form the focus of ongoing adaptation work to make South Lanarkshire a more climate change resilient area. An exercise has also been undertaken with the Climate Change and Sustainability Steering Group in January 2025, providing a baseline assessment of the Council's current adaptation capabilities using the Adaptation Scotland Capability Framework, highlighting areas of progress and where further work is needed. The assessment showed that South Lanarkshire Council is furthest developed against the working together capability, likely due to the Council's active involvement in Climate Ready Clyde and the culture and resources capability. We scored higher here due to strong governance arrangements, the establishment of cross-resource working groups and significant training provision. The assessment identified understanding and strategy capabilities as areas for ongoing development, and tasks to build on these have been embedded within the Sustainable Development Climate Change Strategy Action Plan for 25-26. Section 6 details some of the next steps for the Council in progressing adaptation. Adaptation remains a key focus area for the Council's existing strategy and action plan, and for 25-26 adaptation measures have been specifically referenced within the plan to make it easier to identify and monitor the breadth of work being undertaken by all services. The actions detailed within the Council's own plan align with those within Climate Ready Clyde's adaptation strategy and action plan, and the synergy between the 2 plans ensures that South Lanarkshire continues to contribute towards the regional ambitions of the partnership. Recognising the importance of the City Region Strategy and Action Plan and authorities' continued commitment to its principles, Climate Ready Clyde are working with all 8 local authorities and the partnership to develop concordats to reaffirm their commitment to delivery of Climate Ready Clyde's adaptation strategy and the action plan. These will include bespoke adaptation actions for each local authority, and the concordats will underline the shared commitment of local authorities in the City region to work together to advance climate change adaptation. Our concordat will be presented to this committee when ready. Finally, it's anticipated that future guidance on new legislation will include best practice guidance for local authorities to develop climate change plans, of which an adaptation plan will form part. Over the longer term, in preparation for the expected changes, the Sustainability team are working to embed climate change adaptation considerations across council services with a view to developing a South Lanarkshire Council adaptation plan in future. Sections 7 through 11 note all the standard implications for the Council, but it's important to note at Section 9, in reference to the climate change, sustainability and environmental implications, that Scotland's climate is already changing and we are experiencing more extreme weather, the consequences of which are damaging infrastructure, disrupting vital services and shifting growing seasons. Adaptation is necessary regardless of how much carbon emissions are cut, and the failure to adapt effectively will mean that the impacts of climate change will be felt more severely. Adaptation is therefore a critical element of the Council's climate change activity. So just to refer back to the recommendations at Section 2, it's asked that the Council approves, the Council notes the progress made towards delivering climate change adaptation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Do we have any questions or comments on that report? Councillor Kirsten Robb, please.
Sorry, I did say take me last, but nobody else. No, thanks very much for the report. I think it's a really an important one, although I'm really sad that we're having to actually consider adaptation because we've not done enough internationally, nationally or locally on this in the past. But I think we just have to face up to it. We've got a certain amount of carbon emissions locked in. Let's not do things that make it worse. But we have to consider that. And my question, just having seen the Fire and Rescue Services social media today, that there's a very high or extreme risk of fire across South Lanarkshire. fuelled by climate change and dry weather, although it's nice and sunny, but it's obviously bringing with it risks. What are we doing in terms of the community planning partnership on adaptation? I'm sure some of those public bodies will have similar duties to produce adaptation plans. How are we taking this forward at a community planning level as well?
Adam Wallace, please.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. In terms of the work that we're doing with the Community Planning Partnership, we've actually met with them this week to discuss how we can better or re-establish the link between the sustainability side of what the Council does and the Community Planning Partnership. In terms of how we're going to do that, we're not sure just yet, but as soon as we do, I'll make sure that we bring it to your attention. But just be assured that we have engaged with the Community Planning Partnership and we're looking to re-establish that connection.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. So can we return to the recommendation on page 67 and agree to note that report? Thank you. Okay, item number 7 on the agenda is the Climate Change Communication Programme 2025, and that is on pages 73 to 80. Can I invite Gemma Dodds to speak to this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide committee with an update on the climate change and sustainability communications activities planned during 2025 and 2026. I refer you to section 3 of the report, which provides background information relating to the importance of climate-related communications. Scotland is committed to becoming a net zero nation by 2045. Expert advice has been clear that 62% of changes needed to achieve net zero can only happen with societal or individual behaviour change. It is therefore vital that everyone in our society understands the nature and scale of the climate emergency. As such, the Council's Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy 2022 to 2027 identifies community empowerment as a key priority. One of its main goals is to improve public understanding of sustainable development and the climate emergency to influence positive change. The Council's priorities for climate change and sustainability communications during 25-26 is outlined in section 4 of the report, focusing on increasing public understanding, empowering action, fostering engagement and collaborating for broader reach. Communications will highlight real-life stories and local successes to inspire participation. Section 5 outlines a communication strategy for engaging diverse audiences in South Lanarkshire, including residents, businesses, young people and council employees. A mix of traditional and digital communications methods will be used, such as South Lanarkshire View articles, social media, press releases, email bulletins, infographics and training sessions. The approach will be led by the Sustainable Development and Climate Change team and Communications and Strategy resource, with input from relevant services and collaboration with external partners like the Lanarkshire Climate Hub to ensure effective messaging and wider outreach. A full list of climate engagement initiatives is included in Appendix 1. These include local, national and global campaigns such as Earth Hour, Climate Week and Recycle Week. The Council has already supported some events such as the Glasgow Retrofit Summit and has plans to take part in Earth Day in April. In section 10 of the report, it is highlighted that engaging in climate education and promotion helps the Council meet multiple priorities outlined in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Strategy, one of which is empowering communities to take climate action and be more environmentally sustainable. I refer you back to section 2 of the paper and ask that the content of the report in respect to climate change and sustainability communication activities planned during 2025 and 26 is noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Questions and comments? Can I call Councillor Ross Clark, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Gemma for that report. Not so much a question, more of a comment to welcome this report and much of what's in it. It's, as has been mentioned, really important that we are engaging in communication on climate change in order to take people with us on the journey to net zero. That's crucial, and I think it's even more important now in today's climate, so to speak, in terms of the amount of mis and disinformation that's out there around climate change in our society. So I think that adds on that extra importance to do that. So I'd like to welcome the work that we are doing in this and the focus we've got on our communications on climate change and sustainability.
Thank you. Can I call Councillor Katie Loudon, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Absolutely agree with Councillor Clark and all that he said about how it's good to see this coming forward. Just a very quick request. I see it 5.2 under communication methods. We've got social media posts, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Councillors might remember that after a meeting of the full council, Councillor Johnson Dempsey had requested that the council's Blue Sky account could be verified, and I'm pleased to see that that's now happened, and we'll obviously be keen to push engagement on that. So it's just a request that Blue Sky could be put in there as well when we're thinking about social media posting. Thanks.
Okay, I understand that officers are happy to do that. Can I next ask Councillor Alex Allison, please?
Very important, the communication of this. And as it rightly says, buy-in of the public is very important if we're going to progress. But we continually talk about net zero and then only look at emissions. A lot of people do not have confidence in not just our communication, any communication on this, because it does not take a holistic view of what's happening. The example I'll give you is that some grassland can absorb more carbon than some form of trees. It's never a straightforward look at emissions to arrive at net zero. And I think it becomes very important when we're communicating to the public to get them on site to achieve these important targets, that we are giving a much more holistic approach as to what's actually happening and highlight the difference between net zero and emissions. Thanks.
David Booth, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Councillor Allison. It's a well-made point. I think that officers, in terms of when we look at the climate change and we look at any of the messaging that we put out, is we do try to make sure that that the messaging is accurate, but taking that wider approach as well. We'll take those points on board when we look at communication. So thanks for that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kirsten Robb, please.
Thank you. All good points. Sustainability is wider than net zero and emissions, of course. And I think what this comms programme is seeking to do is to highlight the co-benefits of sustainability action. I'm certainly convinced that climate change is happening. Just about all the scientific community is and the world. But I think if we can talk about the co-benefits, it will bring it back down to what's happening locally. So thinking globally, acting locally is the key. So it's things that people can see, touch, taste, even if it's to do with food, in their own local community and in their own lives and in their own energy bills and so on. So I think this comms plan is all about the positive action. Climate change is rubbish, but we need to highlight the positive things that can happen, improvements in social justice, tackling energy efficiency and damp housing, all those things that matter to our constituents, how their green spaces are managed. And that's why it's so important to get on the front foot and have a comms plan, because if we don't tell people what we're doing, say there's changes in grassland management in their parks, for example, then people will start to contact their councillors and raise concerns. But if we tell people what we're doing, why we're doing it, and follow through on those actions, I think then we'll start to bring people with us and see the benefits of improving as a healthier lifestyle and more sustainable communities and more resilient communities through sustainability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No more questions, I think. So can we agree to note that report, please? Thank you. Okay, item number 8 on the agenda is waste policy update, and that's on pages 81 to 86. Can I invite Kirsty Maguire to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with an update on the latest developments in the waste sector, particularly around future policy and new legislation. This report was previously provided for noting to Community and Enterprise Resource Committee on the 25th of February. Section 3 of the report provides some background and emphasises the important role that the sustainable waste management practices play in a move towards a more circular economy. The section highlights the extent of the reforms required to drive forward improvements in the sector and notes that the new policies and legislation will ultimately change the way local authorities in Scotland plan, design and deliver refuse collection services in the future. Section 4 of the report provides an update on specific policies and legislation. The newly published Circular Economy Scotland Act 2024 is referred to at Section 4.1. This Act contains primary legislation aimed at modernising, recycling and supporting the transition to a circular economy. The measures contained in the Act are set out at Section 4.1.2 of the report. These measures underpin and complement the waste route map, which is discussed in the report at Section 4.2. The waste route map, which was published in December 2024, sets out the strategic direction for waste management in Scotland until 2030 and replaces the former Zero Waste Plan. Of particular consequence to the Council is the development of a new mandatory code of practice on household recycling and how this is likely to have an impact on household refuse collection services in the near future. Information on this can be found at sections 4.24 and 4.25 of the report. Also of significance is the introduction of statutory reuse and recycling performance targets for household waste at 4.2.6, a reference to the review of rural food waste collection exemptions referred to at 4.2.7, and the Scottish Government's commitment to consult on separate textile collections, which is mentioned in the report at section 4.2.7. Section 4.3 of the report provides an update on the deposit return scheme and confirms a new implementation date of the 1st of October 2027. Section 4.4 relates to the UK-wide packaging waste reforms, which are being managed across the UK by DEFRA. Section 4.4.1 of the report sets out the rationale for the scheme, which aims to ensure that producers pay for the collection and disposal of all packaging waste they put on the market. This scheme aligns with the polluter pays principle and aims to drive an increase in reuse, recycling and in waste reduction. At section 4.42 of the report, there is an update on DEFRA's current estimate in terms of how much the Council will spend collecting and disposing of in-scope packaging waste from households, and that relates to curbside collected and household waste recycling centres in 2025 to 26. The current estimate is 7.779 million. However, it's worth noting that this could change once the scheme administrator has reviewed the process and the model. Section 4.43 of the report notes that the Scottish Government has committed to year one funding under EPR being in addition to the local authority budgets. But there is an expectation that that money will be used to improve recycling rates and reduce carbon emissions. The section also points out that waste services are continuing to liaise with other local authorities and COSLA to understand the extent of any restrictions on how the money can be spent. It also commits the service to providing a further update when more information is known. Section 4.5 of the report provides an update on the latest position regarding the UK emissions trading scheme and the inclusion of energy from waste facilities into the scheme from 2028 onwards. It acknowledges the potential considerable financial burden associated with this. Sections 4.53 to 4.54 sets out potential ways of mitigating financial liability associated with the scheme. Finally, the appendix to the report contains a high-level timeline for implementation of the various pieces of legislation. Referring back to Section 2, the committee is asked to approve the latest developments within the waste sector regarding forthcoming policies and legislation be noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments on that report? Councillor Ralph Barker, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that report. I'm just having difficulty finding the actual references. Could just ask, will it be the intention to replace the 120 litre bins with 80 litre bins, or will we just have a sensible change for those people who want smaller bins? And I presume everybody will want a smaller bin if it was adequate. So that was one question. The other one, again, 429, will the expansion of the emissions trading scheme, will that affect our system of residual waste going to the energy from waste facility at Dunbar? Will that have an effect on that? Which seems to be an extremely good system to me. I'm always being complained, as councillor, always being complained about that the black bin is just landfill, and explained time and time again that hardly any of the black bin goes into landfill. So that was two things. Will the 80 litre bins, will that be brought in and we'll scrap the 120 litre bins? And will the emissions trading scheme, or expansion if you like, will that affect our treatment of residual waste? Thanks.
Kirsty Maguire, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Thanks for your question. In relation to your question about bin capacities, I'm assuming you're referring to residual waste capacities. At present, our standard residual waste capacity in South Lanarkshire is 120 litres per household per week. At this moment in time, there are no plans to reduce the size of bins. What we will be doing is we'll be paying attention to the household recycling charter, which will be mandatory when that is published, and it's due to be March 2026. And we'll be looking to see what the advice in there is in terms of capacities. So nothing's set in stone just now. We'll just we know a kind of direction of travel that we're moving in, and we'll just take advice on that when the household recycling charter code of practice is published and finalised. In relation to your question about the ETS, yes, unfortunately, energy from waste facilities, and that's the one that we use in Dunbar, where our black bag waste goes to, will come under the scope of the emissions trading scheme. And this is the first time that will happen. So there will be financial implications for us, which will come from that. We are still working with the sector. We're still working to determine exactly what that will mean for us. But we do know that there are ways that we can reduce that liability. And I have mentioned that slightly within the report. But ultimately, the less waste that we have generated in black bins means that we will have less financial liability. Also, if we can reduce the plastic content of the waste, that will give us a reduced financial liability. We know that the best way to do that is to encourage people to recycle more and to reduce waste. So all of these things will be tied up in the mandatory code of practice. So, yeah, I think that answers everything, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thanks for that. Well-informed answers to that. The only thing I would say from that is reducing the plastic content in the residual bins adversely affects the contractor's financial situation, in that, rightly or wrongly, they get paid for producing electricity, and that depends on a certain, on combustible material, some of which is organic, which doesn't affect it, but quite a lot is plastic. And they actually, as far as I could tell, they needed a certain amount of plastic to make the system work financially. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I now ask Councillor Kirsten Robb to question?
Thank you. I think it's quite right that the incineration comes under the emissions trading scheme because it does produce emissions which damage the climate. So it is quite right that that happens, but obviously that will have implications and it provides further impetus to why we should be reducing, as you said, Kirsty, and reusing and recycling in the last resort would be landfill in the sky incineration. So thank you for all your work that you're doing in this area. I know there's been a lot of changes recently with all the changes in legislation, different schemes being pulled and added in and so on. So just to appreciate your work. Looking at the first point in terms of reducing waste, can you give me an update on what what action BIFA has taken to progress the reuse hub in East Kilbride and what the update is on the next steps on that to try and get more support for people reducing their waste rather than dumping it?
Kirsty Maguire, please.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Rowe. So, as part of the contacts that we put in place with BIFA on, last year, which is the start of financial year 2024, there was an agreement that we would trial a reuse skip at one of the sites, and that was in East Kilbride. So the skip is on site. The BIFA continues to have discussions with charities about taking the items from there, with limited success, it must be said. So I suppose if anyone, any of the members of the committee are aware of any local charities that would be prepared to work with BIFA to take that, that's something I can take back to them. Reuse is important, but I suppose more important is to reduce the amount of waste that's coming into the system in the first place. And we would always encourage people to try and take it out of the waste system. So, for example, if you have a good piece of furniture which is in good condition, it would always be better to volunteer that to someone, so using sites like FreeCycle, or to sell that so that it doesn't come into the waste stream to start with. That's always beneficial. But in terms of when we do get that through CA sites, then that is something that we want to continue to develop, which is the rehubs, the reuse hubs. Maybe just worth noting as well that on Monday, a member of our waste improvement team attended the first local authority reuse workshop, which was hosted by Zero Waste Scotland, and it was across the public sector. So we will provide an update on what we can learn from that. There was a few speakers from different local authorities who have successful reuse initiatives. East Ayrshire are one of those. So we are reviewing that information and seeing if we can learn from that.
Thank you. Councillor Robb.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Certainly follow up on that. Thanks, Kirsty. A good point about the highlighting to people how they can get rid to them, but it could be gold for someone else and help someone else in poverty or so on, reuse a piece of furniture. How are we planning to communicate that out? Obviously, we've got the bulky waste uplift charge and so on, but how, and I think we've mentioned some things on the website, how are we being proactive about that? For example, in Close is putting up posters to say the various alternatives people can to reuse or reduce their waste. Thank you.
Kirsty Maguire.
Yeah, so you're right. So we have information on the website. We'll also supplement that with social media postings in line with the Council's Digital First policy. But that is a good point to see whether we can put some information about alternatives to using the bulky waste service out when we leaflet properties. Just now we have a leaflet that we give out to properties who are maybe not managing their waste in the way that we'd want them to do so. It is something that we could add, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor John Ross.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I was very encouraged to hear what you were saying there, Kirsty, about places on site. My daughter lives in Preston, and their waste disposal site is a huge facility within the site where people can take items of furniture and all sorts of other items, and people go in and browse and actually take things from there. So that's very encouraging. If you could do more of that, it would certainly help the circular economy, make sure people are using things rather than disposing of them. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions. So if we return to the recommendation on page 81, can we please note that report? Okay. Thank you. Item 9 is urgent business. I don't have any items of urgent business, so thank you all for attending, and that's the close of the meeting. Thank you.